When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I must begin by confessing something. What I am about to tell you is not simply research, not merely the account of a curious traveler who crossed oceans in search of forgotten stories. No, this is a memory, though whether it belongs entirely to me or to someone else I cannot say. It clings to me like the faint smell of incense long after the smoke has vanished, and perhaps by the time I finish telling it, you will understand why. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I was born in New England, raised on a diet of cold winters, Puritan legends, and tales of restless spirits that wandered through old colonial towns. Unlike most of my peers who grew out of such fascinations, I carried mine into adulthood. After graduate school, I found myself drawn to folklore, particularly the stories people whisper when the lights are low and the streets are empty. The ones they swear they don't believe in, yet would never dare to test. That was what brought me to Japan. The invitation arrived on a gray morning in late autumn, when the leaves outside my apartment were curling into brittle husks. A colleague of mine, Professor Hayashi, had written from Tokyo University. His letter was polite, almost too polite, as though he feared his words might trouble me across the ocean. He was organizing a symposium on urban legends of Asia and asked if I might come as a guest speaker to share the Western side of such myths. Our Bloody Mary in the mirror, our vanishing hitchhikers, our headless riders. But tucked in the margin of his letter, written as though by an afterthought, was a line that unsettled me far more than the official invitation. If you are truly interested in the border between story and reality, there is a particular school in Tokyo you should visit. The students speak of Hanako-san. I had heard the name before, of course. Anyone who has dipped even briefly into Japanese folklore has encountered it. Hanako-san, the spirit of a young girl who lingers in the third stall of the third-floor girls' restroom. A child's dare, a playground myth, yet one that never seems to fade, no matter how many decades pass. Still, reading those words, I felt a strange pull. It was as though the invitation was not merely to a conference, but to a threshold, and I, foolishly, perhaps inevitably, stepped across it. Tokyo in winter is a contradiction. Neon signs burn with color, trains roar like veins of light through the city, and yet in the quieter streets, you can still hear the scrape of a broom on old stone, smell the smoke of chestnuts roasting, and glimpse wooden shrines tucked between steel towers. When I arrived, I felt as though I were walking through two overlapping worlds, one pulsing with modern life, the other whispering with centuries of silence. Professor Hayashi greeted me warmly. He was a tall man with thinning hair and a careful smile, the kind of academic who measured his words as though each carried weight. After the symposium sessions ended that evening, he invited me for tea at a small shop near the Sumida River. The place smelled of tatami mats and roasted barley tea. A single lantern swayed gently at the entrance, casting shadows that wavered like breath on the walls. It was there, over the faint hiss of the kettle, that he spoke of Hanako-san again. "You know," he said, folding his hands together, "every child in Japan has heard of her. But what few outside our country realize is that her story changes depending on where it is told. Some say she died during the war, hiding from bombs in the school restroom. Others insist she was the victim of bullying, or something darker. But always she remains in the third stall, always waiting." I remember shivering, though the tea was hot in my hands. "Do you believe it?" I asked. Professor Hayashi's eyes flicked to the corner of the room, as if checking to make sure we were alone. His voice dropped. "Belief is not necessary. What matters is that the children believe. That belief gives her form. He did not elaborate, and I did not press him, but his words lingered like a pebble in my shoe. A few days later, he arranged for me to visit the school he had mentioned. It stood in the outskirts of Tokyo, away from the glass towers and crowded crossings. The building itself was not abandoned, but neither was it lively. It had the look of a place that had endured too much history, long wooden corridors polished by thousands of footsteps, windows clouded with dust, and an air of waiting as though the walls themselves remembered more than they wished to share. A young teacher, no older than myself, agreed to guide me. Her name was Nakamura. She had the kind of voice that carried both kindness and fatigue, the tone of someone who had repeated the same warnings too many times to too many students. As she walked me through the dim corridors, she lowered her voice. The children still talk about her. They dare each other to knock on the third stall. Sometimes they swear they hear a voice reply. A little girl's voice. But when the teachers check, of course, there is nothing there. Her words echoed against the floorboards as we turned down a quieter hallway. It was here that the air changed. I cannot explain it better than this. The sound of the world seemed to dull. My footsteps grew softer. The hum of distant traffic faded, and even the light through the windows felt strained, as though it had traveled too far to reach us. "This is the corridor," Nakamura said, almost whispering. "The girls' restroom is at the end." I did not go inside that day. I stood only at the threshold, gazing at the old wooden door. Its paint was chipped, its handle tarnished with years of touch. Somewhere inside, I could hear the faint drip of a faucet, but what I remember most is the silence between the drips. It was heavy, like the pause before someone answers a question you should never have asked. Nakamura must have seen me shiver. She smiled, though her smile did not reach her eyes. "It is only a story, Whitmore-san, but stories are powerful here. Children believe them, sometimes even adults." She touched my arm lightly, guiding me away. But as I turned from the door, I thought I heard something, a sound so soft it might have been my imagination. The faint shuffle of feet, small feet, as though someone inside the restroom had stepped closer to the door. That night, back in my hotel room, I could not sleep. The city outside buzzed with neon, but in my mind I kept seeing the shadowed corridor, the closed door, the silence that pressed like unseen hands on my chest. I told myself it was nothing, just the power of suggestion, the weight of an old story retold too many times. And yet, as I drifted toward uneasy sleep, I remembered something my grandmother once said when I was a boy, chasing ghost stories across New England graveyards. "Be careful what you listen to in the dark. Some stories are not content to remain words. Some want to be answered." In the half-dream that followed, I saw a door, a third stall, and a child's voice, barely above a whisper, asking me if I was there. I woke drenched in cold sweat, the city lights flickering against my window. For the first time in many years of studying folklore, I felt less like a scholar and more like prey. And so, my invitation to Japan became more than academic. It became a descent, one I could not yet recognize. I had not touched the door, had not knocked, had not called out the forbidden name. But already the silence of that corridor was inside me. Already I had begun to listen. And once you start listening, Hanako-san will not let you stop. I returned to the school a week later. It was a clear, cold morning, the kind where the air is so sharp it feels like glass in your lungs. Tokyo bustled as always. Cars, trains, laughter spilling from cafes. But as I rode the subway out toward the quiet edges of the city, I felt myself sliding into a different world. The stations grew emptier, the advertisements less frequent, and the buildings outside the windows leaned toward wood and weathered paint rather than steel and glass. The school waited at the end of a long, narrow street lined with shuttered shops. The gate creaked when I pushed it open, and the courtyard beyond was nearly silent. A few dry leaves skittered across the pavement, scraping like fingernails. I could smell something faint, almost sweet, the kind of scent you notice just before it disappears, like incense burnt down to its last coil. The halls were dim, though it was still morning. The windows let in only a thin wash of light, filtered through grime and age. I walked slowly, my footsteps hollow on the wooden boards. Somewhere distant, a bell rang, though not from this building. The sound was faint, foreign, as though carried on the wind from a place where time had stopped. Professor Hayashi had not come with me. Instead, it was Nakamura again, her face drawn and pale in the half-light. She carried herself with the cautious air of someone who knows more than she wishes to admit. When I asked if she believed in the stories, she only said, "It doesn't matter what I believe. The corridor remembers." We passed classrooms with their doors ajar, desks still neatly lined, though no children sat in them. On one chalkboard, faint white streaks lingered, half-erased words from a lesson long ago. I could not read the Japanese, but the shapes looked almost like fragments of a prayer. The corridor she led me toward was different from the rest. Longer, darker, as though the building itself had decided to swallow more of the light. The air felt cooler here, heavy with stillness. I had the impression that sound traveled differently, muffled and drawn out, as if the walls themselves were reluctant to give it back. "This way," Nakamura whispered. We stopped halfway down, near a row of lockers warped by time. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I realized the paint on the lockers was peeling in streaks that resembled handprints. I reached out, almost without thinking, and brushed the surface with my fingers. The metal was cold, colder than it should have been. I wanted to speak, to ask some trivial question to push away the silence, but before I could, something interrupted. A sound, very soft, a single click, like the tap of a shoe against the floor. I froze. Nakamura froze too. Her eyes darted toward the far end of the corridor, where the shadow of a doorway stood faintly open. It came again. Tap, tap. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, small, deliberate. My pulse quickened. They were not the steps of an adult, heavy with weight, nor the shuffle of someone careless. They were light, careful, the steps of a child in shoes too stiff, echoing faintly against the wood. Nakamura placed a hand on my arm, her grip firmer than I expected. "Do not call out," she whispered. Her eyes, usually calm, were wide. "Do not answer." The footsteps ceased. The silence that followed pressed on my ears until I thought I might hear the blood rushing through my veins. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and when I glanced toward the far doorway again, I thought, though perhaps it was only the poor light, that something small moved just out of sight. We left quickly. Or rather, Nakamura pulled me back down the hall before I could ask or protest. She led me to the courtyard, where the sunlight seemed almost violent after the dim corridor. I breathed deeply, as though surfacing from underwater. She said little after that. Only once when we parted did she murmur, "Some places in this school are better left quiet. The more you listen, the more it listens back." That night I reviewed the notes I had scribbled in my journal. My handwriting was uneven, my words rushed. I had written phrases like cold handprints, footsteps of a child, do not answer. And at the bottom of the page, in smaller letters that I hardly remembered writing, were 3 words. She was waiting. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, it was fractured by dreams. In one, I was back in that corridor, standing before the girls' restroom door. The wood was cracked, and from beneath it spilled the faint glow of a lantern. I heard the tapping of shoes again, and then a voice, high, soft, childlike, calling something I could not quite understand. When I woke, the sound lingered in my ears. I rose to wash my face in the bathroom of my hotel room, and as the cold water touched my skin, I heard a faint creak behind me. The door to the shower stall shifted, though no draft stirred the air. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired, that jet lag and suggestion were preying on my mind. Yet as I turned away, I felt the prickling certainty that if I opened that door, something small and patient would be standing there. I did not open it. I left the bathroom light on, and when I finally returned to bed, the city hum outside felt like a shield against the silence pressing from within. Morning brought no relief. The neon glow and restless traffic of Tokyo seemed indifferent to what I carried inside me, but I knew I could not simply walk away. I had come here chasing stories, believing myself immune to them, a scholar rather than a participant, but already the line between story and reality was bending, thinning. Already I had followed the sound of footsteps into the dark. And when I closed my notebook, I saw, faintly scrawled in the margin, though I did not remember writing it, the question every child in Japan is warned never to ask. Hanako-san, are you there? I would not have returned a third time if not for the old teacher. His name was Sato, a man well into his 70s, his posture bent, but his gaze still sharp with the kind of weight that comes from carrying too many unspoken stories. It was Professor Hayashi who introduced us, insisting that if I wished to understand the roots of this legend, I must hear it from someone who had lived through the war years. We met in a quiet tea house near Ueno Park, where bare branches scratched faintly against the window. Sato's hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup, but when he spoke, his voice carried the steadiness of memory. I taught at that school for 30 years, he said, long enough to see children grow into parents, and their children come to sit in the same classrooms. Long enough to hear Hanako's name whispered in every generation. You see, the story never faded. If anything, it grew stronger. He paused, his eyes narrowing, as though peering at something beyond the room. The tale is simple, as you know. Go to the third-floor girls' restroom, knock 3 times on the third stall, call her name. If she is there, she will answer. His words were matter of fact, yet a chill traveled along my spine. Perhaps it was the way he leaned closer then, lowering his voice, as if the walls themselves might overhear. Some say she died in the war, that when the air raid sirens blared, the children ran to the shelter. But Hanako hid in the restroom. She thought it would protect her. The bombs fell, and when the smoke cleared, she was gone. Others say she was killed by a man who followed her inside, or that she ended her own life, though she was so young. He shook his head. There are many versions, but the truth is not in the details. The truth is in the stall itself. For decades, no child could pass that restroom without glancing at the third door. Even now, if you listen, you may hear them dare each other, may hear them knock, may hear them whisper the forbidden question. I asked him if he had ever tried it himself. A faint smile touched his lips, but it was not a smile of humor. Once, long ago, I was a young teacher then, foolish, eager to prove myself braver than children. I knocked. I called her name. His voice faltered. He set his cup down carefully as though it had grown heavier. Something answered, a sound, no louder than a breath. I told myself it was the wind, but I never stepped into that restroom again. That night I wrote his words in my journal, the ink smudging where my hands shook. It should have been enough, a cautionary tale, a warning to leave well enough alone. And yet the next morning I found myself once more at the gates of that quiet school, as though drawn by invisible threads. The corridors seemed darker than before, though the day was bright. My footsteps echoed, swallowed quickly by the silence. Dust floated in shafts of light, catching like ghosts mid-air. I made my way slowly, each turn of the hallway pulling me deeper, until at last I stood before the girls' restroom on the third floor. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The air inside was cooler, damp with the faint smell of old water and mildew. Tiles cracked beneath my shoes and a faucet dripped steadily, its rhythm sharp in the silence. 3 stalls lined the wall. The first stood ajar, its door hanging crooked. The second was shut tight, its lock broken long ago. And the third stall waited. Its door was closed, its surface worn with scratches and faint graffiti, names carved by restless hands. But what caught me was the handle. It gleamed faintly, as though touched often, polished by countless fingers over the years. I stood there, the silence pressing against me, and I felt it, the certainty that someone was on the other side. Not seen, not heard, but present, like the charged air before a storm. My breath quickened. The stories rose in my mind. The old teacher's trembling voice, the shuffle of feet I had heard before. I raised my hand toward the door. The metal was cold beneath my fingertips. And then, I swear to you, I felt it. A faint warmth, as though another hand lingered just beyond, separated only by the thin barrier of wood and iron. I jerked my hand back, heart hammering. The faucet dripped again, loud as a gunshot in the silence. I thought I heard something else then, so soft I cannot swear it was real. The faintest exhale, the sound of breath meeting wood. For a moment I considered it, to knock, to speak her name, to ask the forbidden question. My mouth even shaped the words, but fear clamped down on me like a hand on my throat. I turned and left, stumbling back into the corridor where the air was warmer, brighter, safer. Only when I reached the courtyard did I realize how violently my hands were shaking. That night I could not eat. I paced my hotel room, the city's glow pressing against the window, trying to drown the memory. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the third stall door, the way it seemed to lean toward me, waiting. I heard the drip of water, the faint breath, the silence that swelled like a tide. And in the deepest hours when the neon had dimmed and even Tokyo's restless hum grew faint, I dreamed again. In the dream, I was standing once more in that restroom. The stall door stood before me. Slowly, inexorably, my hand lifted. I knocked once, twice, 3 times, and from within came the sound of a child's voice, soft, clear, terrifying in its innocence. "I am here." I woke with a cry, my throat raw, the sheets damp with sweat. The hotel room was empty. The light in the bathroom flickered once, then steadied. But I could not shake the feeling that something had followed me back from that corridor. Something small, patient, waiting. It is strange, the way certain places follow you long after you leave them. You can walk away, close the door, take the train back into the comfort of the city, yet a shadow lingers in your chest. The school had done that to me. Every night as I lay in my hotel bed, I felt the third stall pressing at the edge of my thoughts, like a hand tapping lightly on the walls of my mind. I told myself it was curiosity, that I was still the scholar who had come to Japan to study folklore. But deep down, I knew it was more. The stall was calling me back. On the 4th night after my visit, I gave in. I told no one. Not Professor Hayashi, not Nakamura, certainly not the old teacher Sato, who had warned me with trembling voice. This was a choice I made alone, though even as I packed my small recorder and notebook into my bag, I wondered if it was truly my decision, or if I was merely obeying something older, something that had been waiting for me since the first moment I stepped into that corridor. The train ride felt endless. By the time I reached the neighborhood, the streets were hushed, the shop fronts shuttered. A mist hung low, curling around the lampposts like restless spirits. The school loomed ahead, darker than I had ever seen it, its windows blank, its gate yawning open as though it had been expecting me. Inside, the silence was suffocating. My footsteps on the wood seemed far too loud, as though I were trespassing not in a building, but in a dream. Each hallway stretched long and empty, yet I felt watched from every shadow. My breath fogged faintly in the air, though it was not cold enough for frost. I reached the 3rd floor. The corridor was darker here, the air heavier, and I could smell something faintly metallic, like old water mixed with rust. I paused, pulling out my recorder, a small, ordinary device, no different from what I used during interviews. But holding it in my hand now, I felt as though I were preparing a ritual rather than research. I pressed the red button. The recorder clicked softly, its light blinking. I walked slowly down the corridor, narrating under my breath to steady my nerves. December 20th, 3rd visit to the school, entering the girls' restroom now. My voice shook despite my effort to sound clinical. The restroom was colder than the hall. The faucet dripped in its steady rhythm, each drop echoing like a clock counting down. I stood before the stalls, my recorder raised. The first stall yawned open, its hinges groaning softly. The second remained closed, silent. And the third seemed to lean toward me, its door catching what little light there was. I swallowed hard. My hand trembled as I lifted it. 3 knocks. The sound rang hollow, wood against silence. I forced the words out, my voice barely above a whisper. Hanako-san, are you there? The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the drip of water, steady, unbroken. I stood frozen, my recorder clenched in my hand, waiting. Then faintly, so faintly I thought I imagined it, came a sound from behind the door. Not words, just the shift of weight, like bare feet moving softly against the tiles. My chest tightened. I backed away, my legs shaking, but the stall door did not move. The restroom held its silence once more, and I fled. Down the corridor, out the gate, into the blessed noise of the street beyond. It was only later, back in my hotel room, that I dared to play the recording. I sat at the desk, the city lights flickering outside, and pressed play. At first it was as I remembered. My own nervous voice, the creak of the door, the drip of water, my 3 knocks. My whisper, Hanako-san, are you there? Then silence. And then, clear, unmistakable, a reply. I am here. The voice was soft, high-pitched, like a child's. It was not my imagination. It was not static. It was words. I dropped the recorder, my breath catching in my throat. The device clattered against the desk, still playing. In the background, I heard the sound again, faint but real, the shuffle of feet, the exhale of breath. I turned it off with shaking hands. For a long time, I sat in the glow of the desk lamp, listening to my own heartbeat thunder in my ears. I had come seeking folklore, stories whispered by children. But this was no story. This was a voice captured on tape, carried across the gulf between worlds. I thought of Sato's trembling hands, of Nakamura's warning, of Hayashi's words. Belief is not necessary. That night I did not dream. Or if I did, the memory was taken from me. But when I woke, my recorder lay on the desk where I had left it, its red light blinking faintly. I had turned it off, I was certain of it, and yet it had recorded again. With dread, I pressed play. The tape hissed softly, a long silence. And then once more the child's voice, closer this time, as though leaning into the microphone. Why did you leave? The words froze the breath in my chest. I sat very still, staring at the blinking red light, knowing with a terrible certainty that Hanako-san was no longer waiting behind a stall door in a forgotten school. She had followed me. I thought I could escape her. That night, after hearing the voice on the recorder, I told myself I would leave the city. Tokyo was vast. Surely its streets and neon crowds could absorb me, drown her out. I even packed my suitcase, folding clothes with hands that trembled, forcing myself to believe I was still in control. But as I zipped the bag shut, I knew it was already too late. The first sign came just after midnight. I had left the bathroom light on, as I often did now, though the brightness brought me little comfort. As I lay in bed half awake, I heard it, the faint sound of water dripping, steady, patient. I turned my head. The sink was dry, the faucet closed tight. Yet the sound continued, a single drop at a time, echoing from somewhere within the walls. I rose, moving quietly across the room. The sound grew louder near the bathroom door. I hesitated before opening it, my hand pressed flat against the wood. The dripping stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then came another sound. 3 knocks, soft, evenly spaced, from the other side of the door. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The knocks did not repeat. The room was still, yet the air seemed to vibrate, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. I sat awake until dawn, every muscle taut, waiting for the next sound. None came. The following day I told myself it was exhaustion, that my mind was twisting shadows into threats. I carried my recorder with me everywhere, though I did not press play. The device had become a weight in my pocket, a reminder that the boundary between story and reality had already broken. That night, the second sign arrived. I had just returned from walking the city streets, hoping the crowds would wash away the dread. My room was silent, untouched, yet when I entered the bathroom, the mirror was fogged, as though someone had showered moments before. Slowly, with a trembling hand, I reached out and wiped the glass. For an instant, I thought I saw her, a small figure, standing just behind my shoulder, head tilted, hair falling across her face. My breath caught. I spun around. The bathroom was empty. The tiles were cold beneath my feet. I dared to look back at the mirror. The fog had nearly cleared. My reflection stared back, alone, hollow-eyed, pale with fear. But at the bottom edge of the glass, faint and fading, I saw words drawn in a child's hand. I am here. I left the light on again that night, though it did little good. I drifted into uneasy sleep, only to wake to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Soft, small, the patter of shoes too light to belong to any adult. They stopped outside my room. I held my breath, straining to listen. For a moment there was silence. Then the faint creak of weight shifting, as though someone small stood just beyond the door, waiting. My mouth went dry. I reached for the handle, then stopped. What if I opened it? What if she was standing there, patient, smiling that innocent smile children wear when playing hide and seek? I could not move. My body locked in place, frozen between terror and curiosity. The silence stretched. Finally, the footsteps moved again, fading down the corridor. I sat awake until dawn, staring at the door, my body aching with tension. The next morning, I asked the hotel clerk if any children had been staying on my floor. He frowned, shook his head. "No families booked this week," he said. His words brought no comfort. If anything, they carved the truth deeper. The sounds had not belonged to a living child. By the fifth night, I was unraveling. My eyes burned with lack of sleep. My journal pages filled with frantic handwriting, words scrawled sideways, questions left unanswered. Each time I tried to steady myself with reason, the memory of the voice on the recorder shattered it. I could still hear it, even in silence. Why did you leave? That night I dreamt again. I stood in a narrow corridor, the walls damp and cracked. At the end of the hall was a door, the third stall door. I walked toward it, powerless to resist. The handle gleamed faintly in the dark, just as it had in the school restroom. I reached out, knocked 3 times. My voice in the dream was steady. "Hanako-san, are you there?" The door creaked. Slowly it began to open, and from the darkness within, 2 small hands reached out toward me. I woke with a cry, heart racing. The room was silent, but when I glanced at the bathroom, the door was ajar. I knew I had closed it before bed. I forced myself to rise, to cross the room, to push the door shut with trembling hands. As the latch clicked, I heard it, a single giggle, high and breathy, from the other side. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor, unable to move. The giggle did not repeat. The room fell still. But I knew then with certainty, the school had not been her prison. It had only been her doorway. And by knocking, by speaking her name, I had opened that doorway wide. She was no longer waiting behind the stall. She was here, in my hotel, in my shadow, in the silence that pressed against me even now. And each night, her presence grew stronger. The days began to dissolve into one another, each blurred at the edges like ink bleeding across wet paper. I would wake, uncertain if I had slept at all, my body heavy as stone, my eyes raw with exhaustion. The city outside moved on in its endless rhythm, trains rattling, neon buzzing, crowds surging. But I drifted through it like a ghost, half present, half lost in a fog that clung no matter where I went. I told myself that sunlight would protect me, that whatever haunted the hotel room belonged to the night. But even in the day, I felt her. In the reflection of shop windows, a shadow too small to be mine. In the laughter of school children on the train, one voice too clear, too close, though no one sat beside me. At breakfast, the waitress paused as she poured my tea. Her eyes flicked to the empty chair across from me, and for a moment her brow furrowed, as if she had seen someone sitting there. When I looked, the chair was empty, but the cup of water on the table rippled faintly, though no hand had touched it. I tried to confide in Professor Hayashi when we met one afternoon near the university. He greeted me with warmth, but his smile faded as he studied my face. "You look unwell," he said. "I haven't been sleeping," I admitted. My voice sounded strange, as if it belonged to someone else. We sat on a bench beneath bare trees, and I told him pieces of the truth, though not all. I spoke of the old school, of the stories I'd heard, of the knocks and whispers. His gaze grew distant. "Urban legends spread because they feed something deep within us," he said gently. "But sometimes they also feed on us." I wanted to tell him about the recording, about the voice that should not have been there, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain that she was no longer confined to a story, that she walked beside me unseen? Hayashi placed a hand on my shoulder. "Perhaps you should rest. Leave the research for now." Rest. As if rest were still possible. That evening, back at the hotel, I tried to write in my journal, but my sentences faltered halfway, my pen scratching nonsense symbols across the page. My head nodded, sleep tugging me under, though dread kept me fighting against it. At last I surrendered. I dreamed I was in the corridor again. Always the corridor. The air damp, the light flickering, the third stall waiting at the end. I walked toward it, though every step was heavy, as though wading through water. The door gleamed faintly, familiar, inevitable. I raised my hand to knock, but before I touched it, I felt someone slip their hand into mine. Small, cold. I turned my head. A girl stood beside me in a neat school uniform, her hair long and dark, her face hidden as she looked down at the floor. She did not speak. She only held my hand tighter. I woke with a start, the weight of that hand still lingering in my palm. My room was silent. Yet on the bed beside me, the blanket was wrinkled, indented as though someone small had lain there. I could not bear the room any longer. I fled into the streets, letting the noise and the crowd swallow me. The air was sharp with the smell of grilled fish in exhaust. Lanterns swayed above narrow lanes, their light trembling like hearts in the wind. For a time, I convinced myself I was free, but as I turned a corner, I heard it, the soft patter of footsteps behind me. Light, quick, matching my pace. I spun around. The street was empty. Yet in the distance, at the far end of the lane, I glimpsed her, a small figure in uniform, standing very still, watching. I blinked and she was gone. By the time I returned to the hotel, my nerves were frayed raw. The clerk handed me my key with a polite bow, but his eyes lingered on me longer than usual. "Sir," he said quietly, "if I may, perhaps you should change rooms. Some guests find the 15th floor unsettling." I stared at him. "Why?" He hesitated. "It is only a feeling. Nothing more." But I could tell he was lying. Something in his voice, in the way he avoided my gaze, told me he knew more than he would say. That night I tried to stay awake. I brewed coffee, left the television playing softly. But exhaustion is a tide, and it pulled me under despite all resistance. I woke to darkness. The television was off. The room was silent. At first I thought I was alone. Then I heard it, the sound of breathing, soft and steady, from the corner of the room. I turned my head slowly. The corner was shadowed, the chair there just a shape against the wall. Yet I could see her, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, hair falling forward to hide her face. A small figure seated patiently, watching me through the strands. My throat locked. I could not move, could not scream. The air pressed down like water. And then she spoke, her voice soft, childlike, yet filled with something that hollowed me from within. You came back. I blinked, and the chair was empty, but the sound of her breathing lingered in the air, close, too close, as though she had only slipped into the shadows, waiting for the moment I dared to close my eyes again. I no longer knew where waking ended and dreaming began. I only knew she was with me in every reflection, every silence, every breath. Hanako-san was no longer a legend whispered by children. She was here, and she was not letting go. When terror festers long enough, it begins to erode reason. I had tried to deny what was happening, to call it exhaustion, hallucination, the weight of folklore on a weary mind. But denial has limits. There comes a point where even the most rational man must admit the truth without staring at him from the shadows. For me, that point arrived the morning I found the message on my hotel mirror. It was written in the steam after my shower, each letter drawn by a small, unseen hand. Don't leave me. I stood staring at it until the steam faded and the words dissolved. My chest felt hollow, as though the plea had been written not on glass, but inside my ribs. I knew then I could not handle this alone. It was Nakamura, the local journalist I had met weeks before, who noticed my unraveling. She found me in a cafe, hunched over tea gone cold, my notebook filled with frantic scribbles. She sat across from me, her sharp eyes softening. "You look like you've walked out of a nightmare," she said. "I haven't walked out," I whispered. "I'm still in it." She studied me, then lowered her voice. "There is a temple, small, not far from here. The priest there. Some say he sees what others cannot. If you're serious about this—" She paused as though weighing whether to finish. "He might help." That evening I followed her directions to the temple. It was tucked in a quiet quarter of the city, wedged between modern buildings like a relic stubbornly refusing to vanish. The wooden gate creaked as I entered. Lanterns glowed dimly along the path, their light wavering in the chill air. The priest was old, his back bent, his eyes clouded with years but sharp beneath the haze. He greeted me with a nod, leading me into the main hall where incense coiled upward in ghostly ribbons. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood and something older, something metallic beneath it, like rust. I told him fragments of my story, the school, the stall, the voice on the recording. His face did not change, though his eyes narrowed when I spoke her name. "You called her," he said softly. "I only wanted to understand," I murmured. "Curiosity opens doors that cannot be closed." He studied me for a long time, then sighed. "She is with you now. That much is clear." A weight pressed harder on my chest. "Can you remove her?" The priest shook his head slowly. "Not remove. Perhaps ease. Perhaps guide. But bonds like this, they are threads woven by fear, by attention, by need. She clings to you as ivy clings to stone." Despite his warning, he prepared a ritual. He led me to kneel before the altar. Candles flickered. The great bronze bell of the temple hung silent above us, its surface carved with dragons. The priest lit fresh incense, then began to chant, his voice low and resonant, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. At first I felt only calm, the rhythmic chant, the scent of incense. It wrapped around me like a blanket. But then the air grew heavy, my vision blurred. I swayed, gripping the mat beneath me. I heard footsteps, small bare feet padding across wooden floors. My eyes shot open, but no one stood beside me. Yet the sound continued, circling, slow, deliberate. The priest's voice rose louder, insistent. The great bell above us shivered, though no hand had touched it. A low hum filled the hall. My breath came quick, shallow. And then I heard her. "I don't want to go." The voice was close, too close, as though whispered against my ear. My body went rigid. The priest struck the bell. Its deep tone rolled through me, vibrating in my bones. For an instant, the air cleared, sharp and bright, and I felt her presence recoil, but only for an instant. The candles sputtered, the incense snapped, showering sparks, and then she was there, not seen but felt, behind me, above me, all around me. Her small hands clutched my shoulders, cold as stone. "Don't let them take me," the priest shouted, his chant now fierce, commanding. The bell thundered again. I cried out, not in pain, but in the unbearable pressure of her grip, as though she were anchoring herself deeper into me with every strike. And then, silence. The priest knelt, his body trembling, sweat darkening his robe. He would not meet my eyes. "She will not release you," he said hoarsely. "She has chosen." My stomach turned to ice. What does that mean? It means she is bound. And so are you. Wherever you go, she will follow. Not as a tale told by children, but as part of you. I staggered from the hall, the priest's words echoing like the bell in my skull. Outside, the night air was cool, yet I felt no relief. The shadows between the lanterns seemed deeper than before. Darker. Waiting. As I walked back through the gate, I heard it again. Light footsteps on the stones behind me. When I turned, the path was empty, but the incense smoke clung to my clothes, and within it lingered her voice, soft as breath. We belong together now. I fled into the city lights, but the weight on my shoulders did not lift. The ritual had not freed me. It had only tightened the knot. There comes a point when the haunting no longer hides in shadows or whispers, but walks openly beside you, blurring the line between memory and flesh. By the 8th week, I knew I had reached that point. It began on the train. I had forced myself into the rush hour crowd, telling myself that if I surrounded my body with enough people, she could not find me. The car was a press of suits and bags, the air damp with breath. For a moment, I felt almost safe. Then I felt the tug, a small hand clutching at my sleeve. I looked down. Nothing. The people around me swayed with the motion of the train, oblivious. Yet the pressure remained, as though someone small were pressed against my side. Across from me, a woman stared. Her eyes darted to the space beside me, then quickly away. I wanted to ask her what she had seen, but the words caught in my throat. The train rattled on, carrying us through tunnels black as sealed coffins. At the next stop, I fled onto the platform. The crowd streamed around me, their footsteps a steady roar. And over it, I heard another sound. Light, skipping steps, circling me like a child playing. I spun in place, my breath ragged, but saw nothing except the endless tide of commuters. That night, I met Nakamura again. She had insisted I not isolate myself. We sat in a small izakaya, the lanterns casting warm light, the clatter of dishes filling the air. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of normalcy. Until I saw her. She was crouched at the far end of the room, half hidden beneath a table, her knees pulled to her chest. None of the diners noticed her, only me. Her dark hair veiled her face, but I knew that if I lifted the strands, I would find eyes waiting. I froze. My chopstick slipped from my hand. Nakamura followed my gaze, then frowned. "What is it?" I swallowed hard. "Don't you see her?" Her brow furrowed. She looked toward the empty table, then back at me. "There's no one there." But there was. I could feel the weight of the girl's stare, heavy as stone. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I excused myself, stumbling into the alley outside, where the air was sharp with smoke and rain. That night in my hotel room, I woke to laughter. High, childlike, muffled as though drifting through water. I sat up in bed, every nerve on edge. The sound was not coming from the hallway, nor the room beyond the wall. It was inside the room, circling. I whispered, my voice breaking, "What do you want from me?" The laughter stopped, a silence so deep it hurt my ears. Then softly, "You called me." I pressed my hands to my head, willing the words away, but they seeped into me, wrapping around my thoughts. The following day, Nakamura confronted me. She said I looked like death, that my eyes were hollow, my skin gray. You need help, she said firmly. This is beyond stories, beyond research. You're disappearing into something you don't understand. I wanted to argue, but I saw the truth in her eyes. I was fading. Each night drained me further. Each day blurred into dream. As if to prove her point, a waiter passing by our table suddenly froze. His tray rattled. He stared at the space beside me, his face pale. I turned my head, dread clawing at my throat. The chair next to mine was pulled slightly from the table, and though no one sat there, the glass of water trembled, as though a small hand had brushed against it. The waiter stammered an apology and hurried away. Nakamura's face had gone bloodless. I thought I saw... She stopped, shaking her head. No, it must have been a trick of the light. But I knew it wasn't. For the first time, someone else had glimpsed her. That night my dreams twisted. I found myself back in the school restroom, the tiles damp, the air reeking of mold. The third stall waited. My hand reached for it, though I begged myself to stop. I knocked 3 times. The door opened slowly, and she stepped out. Not from shadow, but into the light, as real as flesh. Her uniform crisp, her shoes polished. She looked up at me at last. Her eyes were dark, wide, endless. You found me, she said. I woke with a scream, drenched in sweat. The room was silent, but on the pillow beside me lay a single child's shoe. Small, polished, damp, as though it had walked through rain. I touched it with trembling hands. It was real, solid, not a dream. I sat there until dawn, the shoe heavy in my lap. She had crossed the threshold fully now, no longer confined to whispers and shadows. She walked among the living, and everyone around me was at risk of seeing her too. I had thought of her only as a shadow, a whisper, a weight pressing down on me. But in the days that followed, Hanako-san began to reveal something else, something that unsettled me more than fear ever could. She showed me her innocence. It began one quiet morning. I had woken before dawn, too restless to sleep. The city outside was hushed, its towers just silhouettes against a pale sky. I sat by the window, staring at the streets below, trying to convince myself that I still belonged to the world of the living. That was when I heard it, the soft scrape of chalk against slate. I turned slowly. Across the room on the wall near the desk, faint white lines appeared. Letters, uneven but deliberate, written by an unseen hand. Let's play. The chalk clattered to the floor, though I had never placed any chalk there. My skin prickled. Yet beneath the dread, I felt a strange pang, like a teacher seeing a child's handwriting for the first time. Small, eager, almost proud. I whispered, my voice trembling, "What do you want from me?" There was silence. Then the curtain swayed, though the window was closed. A laugh followed, high, quick, unmistakably a child's. That evening, as I left the hotel, I caught sight of her reflection in a shop window. Not crouched or lurking this time, but standing beside me, her small head tilted as though she were curious about the world beyond glass. She looked, for that instant, like any schoolgirl waiting for her parent to take her hand. And in that fleeting moment, I felt not terror, but pity. Still, the fear always returned. 2 nights later, I was writing in my notebook when the pen was tugged from my grip. It rolled across the desk, stopping at the far edge. I sat frozen, my pulse hammering. Slowly, the pen lifted again. Invisible fingers wrapped clumsily around it. And then, across the page, crooked letters scrawled, "Do you see me?" My breath hitched. "Yes," I whispered. The pen paused, then moved again. "Then don't forget me." I slammed the notebook shut, my hands trembling. Yet long after, I could feel her presence lingering near, hopeful, like a child waiting for approval. It might have ended there, but dreams began to bleed into waking. I dreamed I was in a schoolyard. The air smelled of rain on pavement. Children's laughter rang out, though the playground was empty. And then she was there, standing by the swings, motioning for me to come. When I hesitated, she tilted her head, her eyes dark and wide, pleading without words. Against all reason, I stepped forward. The swing creaked as if she had sat upon it, and for a brief, terrible moment, I felt as though I were her companion, the only one who remembered her. I woke in tears, though I did not know if they were mine or hers. By then, others had started to notice. In the lobby one afternoon, an elderly woman brushed past me, then froze, her face pale. She stared at the space by my side, her lips parting as though she would speak. But she only crossed herself, muttering a prayer, and hurried away. Another time on the subway, a child tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at me excitedly. "The girl! The girl!" she cried. The mother hushed her quickly, but I saw the confusion in the woman's eyes as she looked at me, then at the empty air beside me. Each encounter only tightened the noose. She was no longer mine alone. The world had begun to glimpse her too. One evening in my room, I tried again to confront her. I lit a candle, hoping the flame might offer some shield. "Why me?" I asked aloud. The shadows thickened. The air cooled. Then her voice, soft, almost tender. "Because you knocked." The flame wavered. "Because you opened the door." I wanted to tell her I had never opened it, that I had only listened, only called. But the words died in my throat. Some part of me knew she was right. Curiosity had been the key. Attention was the latch. And now the door could never be shut again. The candle guttered. I felt the mattress dip beside me. Slowly, I turned my head. The blanket was pressed down, as though by small knees. A soft giggle slipped through the air. And then, against my arm, I felt it. The unmistakable weight of a child leaning close, seeking comfort. My body shook with terror. Yet somewhere deep, buried beneath the fear, another feeling stirred, one that chilled me more than her cold touch. It was the urge to reach back. By the 10th week, I began to understand what it meant to belong to her. It was not companionship, not haunting, but something far more dangerous. It was possession, not of body, but of loyalty. She wanted me and me alone. The first sign came one rainy afternoon. Nakamura had invited me to her apartment, insisting I not spend another night alone in the hotel. We shared tea while the storm rattled the windows, the scent of wet earth rising from the street below. For a brief moment, I felt almost human again, anchored by her presence. Then the lights flickered. A shiver crawled through the room. Nakamura's smile faltered. "Did you feel that?" she asked. Before I could answer, the teacup in her hand cracked with a sharp snap. Tea spilled across her lap, scalding her skin. She yelped, dropping the cup. And in that moment I heard it. A laugh, high, girlish, triumphant. My blood froze. Nakamura rubbed her hand, wincing. "That was strange. It just broke." She stopped when she saw my face, pale and rigid. "Was it her?" she whispered. I didn't answer, but I knew. That night, as I tried to sleep, I felt her beside me again, the weight of small knees pressed into the mattress. Her voice brushed my ear like frost. "Don't need her. You have me." I turned, heart hammering. The room was dark, but the outline of a child crouched at the foot of the bed, hair hanging like a curtain. Her gaze, though unseen, pinned me in place. "I never asked for this," I rasped. The silence that followed was heavier than words. Then softly, "But you knocked." Days passed, and the signs grew crueler. When I met with Nakamura again, her phone glitched, screens flickering with static. Once her reflection in the cafe window appeared blurred, as though someone had smeared a hand across the glass. She tried to laugh it off, but I saw the unease beneath her smile. Finally, she confronted me. "You have to choose," she said one evening. "This spirit, this girl, she isn't just haunting you. She's trying to erase everyone else from your life. Do you understand that?" I wanted to protest, but the truth was undeniable. Even now, I could feel her presence crouched somewhere near, listening. The air itself seemed to wait for my answer. I don't know how to stop it, I whispered. Nakamura leaned closer, her eyes burning with urgency. Then we have to find a way. Together. At her words, the temperature dropped. My breath misted. Behind her, a shadow thickened on the wall, though there was no source for it. The shape was small, childlike, but twisted with fury. The overhead light exploded, showering us in sparks. Nakamura cried out, covering her face. I pulled her down, shielding her as glass rained around us. In the sudden darkness, I heard it. Sharp, ragged breathing, inches from my ear. She's mine. I held still, terrified that any movement would invite worse. The darkness pressed in, the silence broken only by Nakamura's trembling breath beside me. Then slowly, the shadow withdrew. The air warmed, though only slightly. When the lights returned, Nakamura was shaking. She didn't need to ask if it was her. We both knew. After that night, I kept my distance. Not because I wanted to, but because I feared what Hanako-san might do if I didn't. I stopped answering Nakamura's messages, stopped meeting her. Each time I thought of reaching out, I felt the sudden cold against my skin, the warning presence close behind me. The spirit was no longer content to be remembered. She demanded exclusivity. She demanded devotion. One evening, as I sat alone, I tried again to reason with her. My voice cracked in the stillness. Why are you doing this? Why can't you let me live? Her answer was simple, chilling in its childish clarity. Because you're all I have. I buried my face in my hands. The weight of her words was heavier than any curse. She wasn't simply haunting me. She was binding me into her solitude, her endless waiting. The silence stretched. Then I felt it again. The brush of small fingers against my cheek. Tender, almost affectionate. And that tenderness was worse than hatred, because it meant she would never, ever let me go. There is a kind of dream that does not fade when you wake, a dream that clings to your skin like damp cloth and whispers into your ears long after the sun has risen. By the 11th week, my life had become such a dream. It began with the sound of dripping water. I woke one night to the steady plink, plink, plink. At first I thought it was the faucet in the bathroom, but when I stepped inside, the air was wrong. Too cold, too stale. The tiles beneath my feet were no longer those of the hotel. They were older, cracked, discolored by years of neglect. The stall doors loomed ahead of me, familiar now in their terror. My throat closed. I knew where I was, the third-floor restroom of the abandoned school, though I had never left my bed. I turned, desperate to retreat, but the door was gone. In its place stretched a hallway, long and dim, lined with lockers that seemed to breathe with the silence. The air smelled of mildew and chalk dust. My heart pounded. I whispered to myself, "It's a dream, just a dream." Yet my footsteps echoed with the weight of reality. Each sound was too sharp, too precise, as if the floor wanted to remind me, "You are here." At the far end of the hallway, I saw her, small, motionless, her face obscured by hair. She stood by a classroom door, waiting. I froze. The hallway stretched wider, longer, as though pushing me toward her. My legs trembled, but against my will, I walked. The lockers rattled as I passed. Papers fluttered out, as though unseen hands were shoving them at me. On the blackboard of every classroom, the same words appeared, scrawled in desperate strokes. "Stay with me." By the time I reached her, my body was shaking so violently I could hardly breathe. She turned slowly, lifting her head. Her eyes were bottomless, like wells carved into the dark. She smiled, small and brittle, and whispered, "Now you can't leave." The floor fell away. I plummeted through darkness, screams tearing from my throat. Then I landed with a shudder, not on stone or earth, but on wet tile. The restroom again. The third stall creaked open. I woke gasping in my hotel bed, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:03 a.m. The room was silent. I pressed my palms against the sheets, reassuring myself they were real, solid. But when I looked down, the cuffs of my pajama pants were damp. Drops of water pooled on the floor beneath me. From where? The dreams returned night after night, each one stealing more of me. Sometimes I walked through endless classrooms where the desks were covered in dust. Sometimes I wandered stairwells that spiraled downward forever. Always at the end, she was there, waiting, patient, unblinking. Daylight brought no comfort. I would catch glimpses of lockers where none should be, hear the squeak of chalk and the hiss of passing cars, smell the faint, cloying odor of mold in the clean air of the city. One afternoon, as I stood at a crosswalk, the light turned green and the crowd surged forward. I hesitated. For an instant, the wide street ahead warped into a hallway lined with flickering fluorescent bulbs. And at the far end, she lifted her hand and waved. The horn of a car snapped me back. I stumbled forward, nearly falling, the driver shouting curses as he sped past. I was unraveling. Nakamura tried to intervene. She came to my hotel, horrified by my appearance. "You haven't slept," she said. "You look hollow." I told her everything. The hallways, the classrooms, the way I could no longer tell if I was awake. She listened, her face pale, then placed a trembling hand on mine. "You must not follow her," she said. "No matter how real it feels, that world is not for the living." I wanted to believe her, but that night I dreamed again. This time the hallway was brighter, sunlight streaming through dusty windows. She stood beside a desk, beckoning. In her hand was a notebook, old and frayed. She held it out to me, her eyes shining with something like hope. I took it. The cover was damp, the pages warped. Inside, the handwriting was childlike, uneven. "Do not forget me, please. Don't go." Tears blurred my vision. For a moment I felt her loneliness, vast and endless, heavier than the grave. She was not only a ghost, but a memory desperate to be remembered. When I woke, the notebook lay on the floor beside my bed. Real, wet, its pages smudged with ink. I picked it up with shaking hands. On the last page, fresh words had been written. "Soon you will stay forever." The final night came without warning. I had not slept in days, too afraid of the hallways that waited behind my eyelids. Yet exhaustion has its own will. Somewhere between the tick of the clock and the rustle of the wind, I drifted into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was standing once again in the school. The hallways stretched before me longer than ever, lined with doors that whispered as though breathing. The air was heavy with dust and the faint metallic tang of blood that had long since dried. I knew deep in my bones that this was no dream. At the far end of the corridor, the third-floor restroom door stood open. A dim light flickered inside, calling me. My feet moved without command. Each step echoed, hollow and final. The lockers rattled, papers fluttered to the floor, and faint voices rose in chorus. Children's laughter, muffled sobs, a teacher's stern rebuke. Echoes of lives cut short, woven into the walls themselves. When I entered, the stalls loomed in silence. The third door was shut. I raised my hand, trembling. 3 knocks. "Hanako-san," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Are you there?" The silence stretched. Then slowly the door creaked open. She stood within, a child in a school uniform, hair long and dark, her skin pale as ash. Yet her eyes, those bottomless wells, held something I had not seen before. Sorrow deeper than the abyss. "You came," she said softly. "I never wanted this," I whispered. "I only wanted to understand." Her lips curved in a fragile smile. "And now you do." She stepped forward, and the restroom dissolved around us. The tiles melted into mist, the stalls into endless rows of desks. We stood in a vast classroom that stretched forever, filled with shadows of children who sat in silence, heads bowed. None of them moved. "They forgot us," Hanako-san said. Her voice trembled, almost human, almost alive. One by one, names erased, faces blurred. I waited. I waited so long. I looked around. The children's shadows flickered, as though they might vanish at any moment. I felt their loneliness, crushing and endless. Why me? I asked again. She tilted her head, her small hand reaching for mine. Because you remembered. Her fingers were cold yet desperate, clinging as though I were the last anchor in a storm. Stay, she pleaded. If you stay, I won't be alone. My heart thundered. I wanted to pull away, to scream, to run. But another part of me, tired, hollow, heavy with pity, longed to give in, to let the endless hallway close around me and never open again. I thought of Nakamura, of the world outside, of light and air and life, but they felt distant, almost unreal compared to the immediacy of her touch. The classroom darkened. The shadows of children rose surrounding me, their empty eyes fixed on mine. They whispered in unison, voices like dry leaves. Stay, stay, stay. Hanako-san lifted her face. For the first time, I saw her clearly. Not a monster, not a curse. Just a girl frozen forever in the moment of her death, begging not to be forgotten. Tears stung my eyes. I can't, I whispered. Her smile faltered. The air trembled, walls cracking, desks splintering as though the weight of her sorrow was tearing the world apart. The shadows shrieked, the sound piercing, endless. Then silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the hotel room. The window was open, curtains swaying in the night wind. My body shook, my clothes damp with sweat. Or was it water? On the desk lay the notebook she had given me. The last page bore new words, written in uneven, childlike scrawl. You left me once. You won't leave again. I slammed it shut, heart pounding. But even as I tried to breathe, I heard it. The faint creak of a stall door swinging open. Not from the bathroom down the hall, from within my room. And in the silence that followed, a whisper brushed my ear, tender and merciless. I'll wait. The candle on the desk flickered. The shadows deepened, and I knew the door would never truly close. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.